I gotta say, this second time at the mental hospital was far less eventful than the first. The first, I had dealt with violence, I had dealt with horrible, horrible people. This time it was mostly just boring. I just waited around for people to give me medication or to take me off of medication, and every day it was like you get up, you do your menu for what you want to eat today, you do your vitals, you talk a little bit with the other people there, and then you stay in your room for basically the rest of the day. Now, sometimes they would knock on your door to come tell you to do a group, but other than that, there was basically nothing there, which to me was a breath of fresh air in a sense because I didn't have to deal with people constantly breathing down my throat, getting harassed, and literally getting assaulted in one instance at that other hospital. It was also just crushingly boring. I wanted to do something. I wanted to do something that would help me cope, like video games, and granted, there was a Wii there, but it was all Wii Sports, and you know I played the shit out of some Wii Sports while I was there because it was the only thing I had, but I was really bored. My time spent there, I would have to characterize it by just how small the place was, because if you think about the last hospital I went to, the reason why it was so violent in the first place was because it was from a low-income area in a part of Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and because it was filled with people. Because in a low-income area, you're likely to have drug problems, and you're likely to have aggression problems from both doing drugs and the act of acquiring them. And so when you combine those two factors together, it makes perfect sense that you would end up in an overcrowded hospital filled with people that have a lot of angst in their system. They take out that angst on others without caring. And so my time ended up just being filled with dealing with these types of people, even though I was in there for suicide. It was a horrible, horrible experience, but this time it was like everybody was on the same page. Now, I was in there for psychotic symptoms, paranoia, hallucinations, things of that nature, but everyone else in there seemed to be in there for cutting or suicide attempt, something like that, so not very violent people outwardly, more so violent people towards themselves. And that gave me a lot of comfort. In fact, when I came in, there was only one person in there. One. Literally just one guy. As I went on, a new person came in, and on the final day that I was there, another person came in. I was in there for about 6 days. The last one I was at there for 5 or 4. No, 5. Oh god, yeah, it was just so boring. 6 days of nothing but waiting around. They gave me an MP3 player at one point, which was kind of cool, but there's really nothing to do. Like, I listened to a few Kendrick Lamar songs on that MP3 player. Thank the Lord they had any. There was nothing. It was just waiting in the void, but I did eventually get my medication changed, which was an immense help because the Lexapro that I was taking, having a lack of it and having it at all both had caused suicidal thoughts. Like, the Lexapro had made the depression somewhat worse, and also not having it caused withdrawal symptoms that also made the depression worse. And so they basically figured that out and were like, hey, we're going to give you Risperdal. Now, Risperdal is an atypical antipsychotic that basically helps with depression and helps with mood stabilizing in people with bipolar disorder and helps with hallucinations, and it also helps with anxiety to an extent. So it tackled all of those subjects all at once. And so I take this medicine and it's like my magic drug. Like, it basically fixes a lot of the problems that the Lexapro had caused in its absence and in being there in the first place, and just the problems that were there before I had any medication. I was really happy to be able to get on that med because most people can't say that medication helps them at all. Like, most people have terrible medication stories where they're like, yeah, this antidepressant or this antipsychotic I took did nothing for me. Well, antipsychotics have a better track record of working, but you get what I mean. Like, they're all these medications that I'm taking have never worked, etc., etc., etc. Those are people you usually hear online, at least. And so you start to find the opposite in places like hospitals, where like my therapist back when I lived in Virginia, she was telling me that she took two medications, a mood stabilizer and an antidepressant, and it got rid of all of her depression. All of the depression she had accrued in her time as a teenager, in her time as, being in her 20s, she had none of it anymore. And this woman was 52 years old. She took these two medications after trying so many different ones, and eventually those two just fixed everything for her. Those are the type of people who work in the psychiatric field. It's not people like the ones you find on Reddit or on 4chan who say that their medicines never work. Those people are the ones you find, the ones who say that their medicines work. And I just happen to be one of those people, in spite of the fact that the groups I frequent are all with people who say their medicines don't work. So I'm like the odd man out in that regard, and I'm glad to be that because I really needed some help, and it tackles the hallucinations, it tackles my depression, and so I felt, generally speaking, much, much better after taking that medication, and I believe that was really the best thing to come out of going to the mental hospital, because if I didn't go, I wouldn't have been able to get that medication nearly as fast, because the main care, because I live in the state of Maine, the main care that I was applying for was going to take weeks to work, and so I needed to use my emergency insurance to actually go somewhere to get medication. And also, there was just the fact that the mental hospital had food. Like, I had not been eating very much at all in my time at my mom's house. Like, the place was basically empty, and so I was like, hey, this mental hospital place seems a bit appealing because they'll feed me 3 times a day. Though luckily that issue has been resolved, thankfully. She has a job now and everything, but at the time, it was just horrible, so going to the mental hospital in order to eat was a very appealing idea to me, and just to get my medication. So the reason that I went, other than all of these obvious mental problems, had a lot to do with the environment that I was in at the time as well, and I'm glad that I went overall, just because it actually helped this time, instead of a bunch of stupid people in the staff who didn't help, instead of constant violence, instead of constant panic. I just had a boring hospital that I laid in. Another thing I realized in this visit to the hospital is that I avoid people a lot. Like, I've talked on this channel about how I'm an introvert, about how I'm a hikikomori, but being offered group activities or just being offered to talk to someone so many times in one place after so many days made me realize just how much I avoid that interaction. Every chance I had, my first thought was to go stay in my room, and it wasn't even all because of anxiety. There was a little bit of anxiety present, but most of what was there was just a lack of interest in the people. I just didn't care about the people or about the things we were gonna do, and so I found myself more entertained by my own fantasies in my head. I would come up with all these different scenarios, vivid images, and just different things that I could think about, and then I wrote. My journal had been filled quite a bit by the time I had left the hospital, because I just sat there and I wrote, and I read books. I went to their bookshelf and I got random things to just read. And I didn't spend any time with the other people, and I felt fine. Like, I didn't feel more depressed doing that. If anything, I felt more depressed when I interacted with the people. And so I just don't care. I just don't care about people, I think. And being at the mental hospital made me realize just how much that is ingrained into my system. Like, I grew up homeschooled until I was 12 and a half, and so I'm very used to the idea of staying all your time alone and So it's just the natural option for me. It's what I've been programmed to do. It's what I think of immediately is to go and sit in my room. And when I'm offered those other things, it's not out of fear that I don't choose them. It's out of complete disinterest. And that was something that I was taught about myself in the mental hospital. Other than those things, I give it like a 7 out of 10. Super boring, nothing as eventful as the last one happened, but it was an experience nonetheless. If you people want proof that I went there, I have the schedule for what you're supposed to do every day right here, and then it says Northern Maine Medical Center Adolescent Psychiatric Unit schedule of activities. So I have this right here that proves that I'm not just sitting here making things up for the sake of a YouTube video. Like, you know, where else could you get all of these things? Like, it's not like I'm just picking these things up off the internet just to, you know, do some fucking bullshit. Like, fucking Risperdal, I need to tell the staff if I feel, you know, it's got all the fucking shit on there. Yeah, this was a place that I went to. I'm not just making these things up in order to be interesting on the internet. So, yeah, there's your proof.